On Monday evening, the children were sleeping in their rooms at the other end of the corridor. Matt and Lynn were sitting side by side on the bed, leaning on pillows. He was reading a book about the Civil War, and she was editing a marketing report. With a light sigh, Matt closed the book and turned to look at his wife. He always liked the way she stuck the tip of her tongue out from under her lips when she was lost in her thoughts. Lifting her pen over the paper, she absently tucked a stray strand of dark hair behind her ear. "Linny?" She replied without looking up. Matt waited, and after a moment she turned to look at him. "Do you love him?" Lynn froze in place and turned a little pale. She stared at him in silence. She just couldn't bring herself to play this game, to ask who, or come up with some ridiculous lie. Matt deserved better. "No," she said. "So it's just about intimacy?" "Matt, she began, trying to hold his gaze. Then she looked at the papers in her lap. "Yes, I think it was because of that. Flirting and then intimacy." "I understand," he said. Silence. "I think I'd like you to sleep in the guest room," he said in the same calm voice. She nodded and got out of bed, slipping her feet into her slippers. She reached for her robe, which was lying on a chair. "Unless, of course, you did it with him in this bed. If you did that, I will never sleep in it again in my life." "No," she said. "I didn't do that." She wanted to say, "How could you think that I would do such a thing?" But that would be ridiculous under the circumstances. Without saying another word, Matt turned off the bedside lamp and rested his head on the pillow, turning his back to her. Lynn stared at him for a moment, with an expression of pain on her face. Then she quietly left the room, closing the door behind her. Friday night. When Matt arrived home, the house was filled with delicious aromas. He hung up his coat, and Lynn emerged from the kitchen to greet him with a smile, though she didn't come too close. She was wearing one of her pretty aprons, the one she used when expecting guests. "Beth and Jason are having dinner at the Frankels. I thought I'd cook us something special tonight," she said, trying to maintain her smile. Matt glanced into the dining room. The table was set with a tablecloth, their fine china, and two of their best wine glasses. There were candles and cloth napkins and silver napkin rings. Matt nodded. "It smells great. Let me go wash up and I'll be down in a few minutes." When he returned, Lynn was just bringing food from the kitchen. She served them fried chicken with potatoes cut into strips and green beans. A delicious salad with orange slices was laid out in a beautiful bowl on the side. They sat down, and Lynn smiled warmly at her husband, although there was tension on her face. "It looks really cute," Matt said. Then he leisurely stood up and climbed onto his chair, towering over the table. Lynn watched in confusion and then horror as he unzipped his trousers, pulled out his instrument, and slowly, carefully urinated on the table. He soaked the chicken, side dishes, salad bowl, and freshly filled glasses of wine. His liquid soaked their plates and tablecloth. "Matt, what?" Lynn screamed almost involuntarily, her eyes wide with shock and alarm. Matt zipped up and got off the chair. He looked at Lynn intently. "I thought that you might want to experience what it feels like when someone destroys something that you hold dear, in which you have invested a lot of time, love, and effort. I thought it might be a useful experience." Lynn didn't answer, just stared at her husband, tears streaming down her cheeks. Matt went to the closet, took out his coat, and left the house. Sunday afternoon. "I requested a transfer," she said. "Oh? They're moving me to the domestic marketing section a week from tomorrow. I wanted it to happen as soon as possible. I'll be in the building on Union Street, away from where I am now." "And why did you request this transfer? I thought you liked the international section." "So I won't be around Douglas. I won't be in the same office anymore." He paused, raking the leaves, and turned to face her, standing nearby in her colorful fall sweater. "And why does this matter to me?" She looked both annoyed and hurt. because I won't be seeing him anymore. I wanted you to know that." Turning his back on her and continuing to rake, he said, "Lynn, you already told me it's over. I completely believe you and trust you. Can you think of any reason why I wouldn't do that?" She lightly stamped her foot and replied, "Damn it, Matt. Do you really think your sarcasm is useful? And do you really think that moving out of this office will fix everything? As if there are no motels, lunch breaks, breakfast meetings, or meetings with clients outside the office? If anything, it's like there aren't a lot of other men who would be more than happy to sleep with you." Matt's voice cracked with anger, but he continued to rake the leaves into neat piles, avoiding looking into her eyes. "Matt," she said, in a low, sad voice, "what else can I do? I'm trying everything I know, to show you how sorry I am, to make amends somehow." He turned to face her. "And do you think there is some way to make amends, some kind of magic formula, the right words, actions, or gestures, and then everything will be fine? Be realistic, Lynn. You're living in a fantasy world." He turned away again and went back to his rake. Monday night, Lynn heard little footsteps coming down the hall, and then Beth's head appeared in the doorway, looking sleepy and confused. "Mommy? Why are you sleeping in the guest room?" Although she was nearly 6, she still spoke with a slight lisp, especially when she was tired. "I've been staying up late for work, honey, and I'm in here so I don't disturb Daddy. Did you have a bad dream?" Beth nodded solemnly, and Lynn got off the bed to pick her up. "Come sleep with me, Bethy, you and Big Bear." She tucked her daughter and the teddy bear under the covers next to her and lay down beside them. Within 5 minutes, Beth was fast asleep again. Lynn carefully picked her and Big Bear up and carried them back to Beth's room. On her way back to the guest room, she suddenly changed her mind and headed towards the master bedroom. The door was open a few inches, and the room was dark. Lynn paused, trying to find the right words, when she was stopped short by an unexpected sound. It was crying. It was Matt, crying quietly, probably into his pillow. Lynn stood, listening. Then she slowly turned away and walked back down the hall to the guest room. Wednesday morning. Each day, it became a bit easier for him to sit in his office and actually work, to focus on what needed to be done. His mind still wandered into painful thoughts, but not as frequently and not for as long. His secretary Bernice could tell that something was wrong, but she had realized that he didn't want to talk about it. She no longer asked, just gave him a sympathetic smile. At 10:50 he stood up, went to the door, and closed it. Then he took a dictionary off the bookshelf and brought it back to his desk. He found the word he was looking for and read the definition aloud. Cuckold, a man with an unfaithful wife. He leaned back. "I'm a cuckold." He repeated it a couple of times. The word felt strange in his mouth. "I'm a cuckold. I've been cuckolded. She cuckolded me." He sat staring into space for a while. Then, with a sigh, he set the dictionary aside and returned to work. Saturday afternoon. "For Christ's sake, Lynn, what did you expect?" Lynn remained silent while her friend Arlene pressed on. They sat in Arlene's kitchen, 2 coffee cups between them. "You sleep with another guy behind Matt's back." Arlene noticed Lynn flinch at her words but continued, "And now you're surprised he's angry and hurt?" "I'm not surprised, Arlene." "Does he know how long it went on?" Lynn shook her head. "I have no idea. I don't know how he found out or when. We haven't talked about it." "Do you think telling him it only happened a few times would make any difference?" "It wouldn't for me." Lynn grimaced. "I mean, if it were the other way around, if he had slept with another woman, whether it was 5 times or 20 times, I'd still be devastated. So no, I'm not surprised. Not at all. I just don't know what to do. I can't reach him and I don't know what to do." She looked down, stirring her coffee with a spoon, while Arlene watched her in silence. 3 weeks later, Wednesday afternoon. No, Matt said firmly. Then, a bit more quietly, no. I don't want her to tell me about it. The therapist frowned slightly. She had short dark hair, almost like a beetle cut, and wore a brown corduroy jumper. Her name was Isabel Harshman. Don't you think it would help both of you if you knew why Lynn did what she did? She asked. Matt looked back at her without glancing at his wife sitting next to him. I imagine it might help Lynn, to get it off her chest, but I certainly don't see how it would help me. To be honest, Dr. Harshman, I think I'm in enough pain already. Hesitantly, Lynn said, I thought maybe if I told you about it, how it happened and why, you might see that I could never do anything like that again. Matt turned to look at her. Do you honestly believe that? Do you really think there's anything you could tell me that would restore my trust in you, Lynn? Make me feel like I wouldn't have to worry about you for the rest of my life, wondering when the next time will be that you jump into bed with another man? Lynn looked down at her lap. Very quietly, she said, No, Matt, I don't think there is anything I can say that would do that. 2 months later, on a Thursday evening. Oh, Matt, the scenery here is just breathtaking. She smiled broadly at him and gently squeezed his hand across the table. They were sitting on the veranda, admiring the Caribbean Sea. The warm air enveloped them, and the rays of the setting sun painted the sky in red tones. On the table between them was a jug of sangria and a plate of fried shrimp. It's really beautiful, isn't it? His answering smile didn't quite match hers. There was tension on his face, especially at the corners of his eyes. He briefly shook her hand in return before spearing another shrimp with a fork. Thank you for agreeing to join me on this trip. Lynn noticed that he had difficulty keeping eye contact for more than a moment. An hour later, they had already woven passion into themselves in their room. They were close, and Lynn loved it. Later, they lay side by side. Matt leaned back with his hands behind his head, and Lynn snuggled up to him, resting her head on his chest. It was amazing, darling, she whispered softly, her voice calm and quiet as Matt gently stroked her back. Lynn seemed to be almost falling asleep until she looked up, met his gaze, and noticed, It's not that I don't like it, but lately it seems to me that every time we make love, you prefer not to look at my face. She grinned. Are you trying to dominate me? She teased. Matt looked at her, and a shadow of concern flashed across his forehead. He sighed. When we come face to face, he began, then hesitated, looking away. I find myself fixating on your expression, on your reaction, and I can't help but imagine you next to him. I can imagine you looking at him the same way. He didn't finish the sentence. They lay in silence, and suddenly Lynn felt a chill run through her body. After a few moments, Matt got out of bed, pulled on shorts and a t-shirt, shoved his feet into sandals, and quietly left the room. 7 weeks later, on a Saturday night, they toiled in silence, each occupied on opposite ends of the room. Lynn sifted through their collection of CDs while Matt sorted through the books. Matt broke the silence. Should I leave the Dickens novels? I've finished them all. Take them if you want. I doubt I'll ever read them, Lynn replied. She set aside Matt's CDs in a small pile beside her, then turned to observe him. She watched the fluid movement of his back muscles beneath his t-shirt, his every action familiar enough to bring tears to her eyes. In a subdued tone, she confessed, You know this isn't what I envisioned. It's not what I wanted. Matt paused briefly. His movements halted, but he didn't turn around. Suppressing a response, he resumed sorting through the books. There was no need for words. They both understood what he would have said. 5 weeks later, Sunday evening. Mama, Mama! Beth and Jason squealed as they leaped out of Matt's car and dashed up the front path into her embrace, leaving their overnight bags forgotten behind them on the ground. Talking over each other, they excitedly recounted their day at the zoo, emphasizing how the giraffes were their favorites. Their necks are this long, and how Daddy had treated them to cotton candy. After their enthusiastic greetings, they darted past her into the living room and switched on the TV. Matt grinned as he approached the house, carrying the kids' abandoned bags. Lynn returned his smile. Sounds like the zoo was a success. I couldn't quite tell if they were thrilled or terrified. We got really close to the giraffes. They were towering over the wall right above our heads, and they were fascinated by the giant turtles. It was a good day. They exchanged a few more words. Lynn offered, "Would you like to come in for a cup of coffee? There's a pot on the stove." No. No thanks," he replied, appearing somewhat uneasy. "I should really be heading off." "Okay," Lynn said, attempting to maintain her smile. "I'll see you on Wednesday night," he said, then turned back towards his car. She watched until the Taurus disappeared around the corner, out of her view. 4 months later, on a Monday evening, Beth sat at the kitchen table coloring while Lynn prepared dinner. Jason was on the floor, engrossed in his favorite wooden jigsaw puzzle, a multicolored clown with 17 pieces, for what seemed like the 500th time. "Mummy, do friends have to kiss?" Beth looked up at her mother with anticipation. Lynn turned to her, pondering. "I'm not sure, sweetie. What do you mean?" "Well, I never kiss Artie or Melissa or any of my friends at school." Beth wrinkled her nose. "That would be gross, kissing Artie. But we met Daddy's friend, and they kiss all the time." Jason chimed in, looking up from his puzzle. "Angela's nice." "Yeah, she is nice. Lynn started. "She made us hot dogs and macaroni and cheese," Jason interrupted, then returned to his puzzle. "Yeah, and she said we could get ice cream next time. But she and Daddy kept kissing, like you and Daddy used to do. Do friends always kiss?" Lynn closed her eyes briefly, then smiled at Beth. "Well, honey, some friends kiss and some don't. It varies, but kids your age don't usually kiss their friends, so you don't have to." "Okay." Beth nodded and resumed coloring, though her drawing bore a striking resemblance to a stegosaurus rather than a duck. "Dinner's ready," Lynn called. "Go wash your hands." As the kids returned to the table, she instructed, 2 pieces of broccoli each, at least, or there won't be any dessert tonight. Observing them douse their hamburgers in ketchup and start eating, Lynn retreated to her bedroom, closing the door behind her. Sitting in the armchair by the bed, she buried her face in her hands and began to weep.